In the heart of 15th-century Spain, a woman named Teresa de Cartagena lived a life that defied the norms of her time. Born into a family of recent converts from Judaism, Teresa faced a unique set of challenges. But it was her deafness, a condition she developed in her 20s, that set her apart and fueled her remarkable journey. Teresa's world was one of whispers and silence. She could no longer hear the bustling streets of Burgos, the laughter of children, or the words of her family and friends. Her deafness was not just a physical ailment. It was a social isolation that left her feeling like an outcast. Yet, instead of succumbing to her isolation, Teresa found a way to make her voice heard louder than ever before. Teresa's grandfather, a prominent rabbi, had converted to Christianity to protect his family from the rising tide of anti-Semitic violence. This conversion brought both privilege and suspicion. Teresa's father, a knight, and her uncle, a bishop, navigated the complex social and religious landscape of medieval Spain. Despite their high status, the family's Jewish heritage was a constant source of tension. Teresa's education was unconventional. She claimed to have studied at the University of Salamanca, but more likely, she was tutored at home and sent to a convent for her education. In the convent, she found a community that accepted her, but her deafness still set her apart. She described herself as living on an island, isolated from the world, but this isolation became a source of strength. In 1450, Teresa wrote her first treatise, Grove of the Infirm. It was a deeply personal and poetic work that spoke to her own struggles and those of others who suffered. She wrote about the noise of the world and the peace of silence, the city of her soul under siege, and the power of inner thought. Her words were a balm to her own soul, and a call to others to find strength in their suffering. Teresa's deafness, she argued, was not a curse but a blessing. It allowed her to hear the voice of God more clearly, free from the distractions of the world. She wrote, "Suffering does not impede our thought, for although suffering makes the invalid powerless in outward deeds, it makes him powerful in inward thought." Her deafness, once a source of shame, became a source of profound insight, but Teresa's words did not go unchallenged. Male writers, unable to accept that a woman could write such a profound and intellectual work, attacked her. They doubted her authorship and mocked her abilities. Teresa, however, was not silent. She wrote a second treatise, Wonder at the Works of God, in which she defended herself and all women. She began by acknowledging her supposed weaknesses, calling her writing a slight and defective work, and herself a small piece of dirt. But these words were not genuine and self-deprecation. They were a strategic move to disarm her critics. She then launched a powerful defense of women's intellectual capabilities, arguing that God could give women the same gifts he gave men. She wrote, "Why should we women not receive the same ability when he judges it necessary and appropriate?" Teresa's words were a challenge to the male-dominated world of medieval Spain. She stood up to the men who doubted her, and demanded that women be recognized for their intelligence and worth. Her treatises were not just personal reflections. They were a call to action, a demand for equality in a world that sought to silence her. Teresa de Cartagena's story is one of resilience and courage. In a time when women and the deaf were marginalized, she found a way to speak her truth and change the world. Her words echoed through the centuries, inspiring others to find their own voices and to stand up for what they believe in. In the 1400s, Norfolk, England, was a bustling place where the Paston family rose from humble beginnings to become influential members of the gentry. At the heart of this family's story is Margaret Paston, a woman of remarkable strength and intelligence who managed the family affairs with unwavering determination. Margaret's letters, part of the famous Paston letters, offer a vivid glimpse into the lives of medieval women and the challenges they faced. These letters not only detail family matters, but also provide insights into the broader social and political landscape of the time. The Pastons, like many families of their status, were deeply involved in the politics of the day, particularly during the tumultuous War of the Roses. Margaret's husband, John Paston I, was a lawyer who spent much of his time in London dealing with legal and property matters. In his absence, Margaret took on the role of estate manager, political advisor, and legal guardian. She was not just a caretaker, but a shrewd and capable leader who navigated the complex world of medieval England with grace and resilience. One of the most striking aspects of Margaret's character is her fierce determination to protect her family's interests. When their rivals, such as Lord Mullins and the Duke of Suffolk, threatened their property, Margaret did not back down. She requested weapons and protective equipment from her husband, ready to defend her home and family against any aggression. Her letters reveal a woman who was not afraid to stand up to powerful men, and who was willing to take whatever measures were necessary to safeguard her family's legacy. Margaret's role extended beyond mere defense. She was deeply involved in the day-to-day operations of the estate, managing tenants, overseeing the household, and ensuring that the family's financial and legal affairs were in order. Her knowledge of law and business was extensive, and she often made decisions independently, even when her husband was away. John trusted Margaret's judgment and encouraged her to take charge, recognizing her capabilities and the importance of her role in the family's success. Despite the challenges she faced, Margaret maintained a deep sense of faith and family. She worried about her husband's health, sending him remedies and promising pilgrimages to holy sites for his recovery. Her letters also reveal a woman who was deeply connected to her children, often writing to her husband about their needs and well-being. She requested items from London, such as clothing and exotic fruits, to make their lives more comfortable and enjoyable. The Paston family's story is a testament to the strength and resilience of women like Margaret Paston. In a world dominated by men, she carved out a space for herself and her family, using her intelligence and determination to navigate the complexities of medieval life. Her legacy is one of a woman who, against all odds, became a powerful force in her own right, leaving behind a rich and detailed record of her life and times. Medieval women's lives and writings shed light on many issues that have become important in recent times. These women's experiences and stories have helped shape the way women are viewed and treated today. By examining their lives through the lens of contemporary feminist theory, we can better understand the complexities and challenges they faced. Toni Morrison, a Nobel laureate, once said that the creation of a literary canon, those books considered important and worthy of study, is a form of empire building. Until recently, most of the books taught in schools and universities were written by white men. Morrison argues that choosing which texts to value is a political act, just like building an empire. She criticizes non-African American writers who write about African Americans, suggesting they are imagining what African Americans think and feel. Instead, she asserts that African Americans have always been imagining themselves and are not other or different. Morrison's ideas can be applied to medieval women, who, despite the limited evidence we have about their lives, were also imagining themselves and their roles in society. Anne Ducil, another feminist critic, warns against imposing a single narrative on people's lives, whether historical or fictional. She reminds us that all stories are created through representation, and we should be cautious about assuming that medieval women lacked agency or power. One concept from African American criticism that can be applied to medieval women is signify in G, a term coined by Henry Louis Gates. Signify in G involves paying homage to earlier works while also revising them to highlight their limitations. Medieval women writers often used a similar technique. For example, when they wrote about their own experiences, they might start by modestly downplaying their abilities, only to assert their authority as writers. This is seen in the writings of Hildegard von Bingen, who reinterpreted misogynistic theories about women to celebrate the Virgin Mary. The modesty topos, or the practice of women writers humbly introducing their work, is a common theme in medieval literature. Anne Bradstreet, a 17th-century American poet, used this technique in her prologue. She acknowledged that her writing might be mean and unrefined, but she also challenged the idea that women should stick to domestic tasks rather than write. Similarly, Harriet Martineau, a 19th-century writer, initially wrote under a pseudonym to hide her identity. When her brother discovered her authorship, he encouraged her to pursue writing, recognizing her talent. Simone de Beauvoir, in her influential book, The Second Sex, argued that women are often seen as the other in society, defined in relation to men. She traces many of these ideas back to medieval thought, where women were considered inferior to men. For example, women were seen as more passive and associated with nature, while men were associated with culture and reason. This idea is echoed in the work of Sherry Ortner, who explores how women are symbolically linked to nature, while men are linked to culture. Gail Rubin's work on the traffic in women is also relevant to medieval studies. She argues that women were often treated as commodities, given as gifts to enhance the status of the giver. This is evident in medieval sagas, where women were traded for political and economic reasons. DNA evidence from Iceland shows that while the male population is mostly of Scandinavian descent, the female population is mostly of Celtic origin, suggesting that Viking men often took women as concubines or slaves. Nancy Chodorov's theories on mothering and the mother-daughter relationship provide insights into medieval women's lives. She argues that the private and domestic nature of women's work, particularly mothering, contributed to their lower status in society. However, this perspective needs to be nuanced for the medieval period. Many medieval women, such as pilgrims and laborers, were active in public life. The life of Christina of Markiate, who fled her arranged marriage to become a religious recluse, illustrates the complex relationships between mothers and daughters in medieval times. Kate Millett, in her book, Sexual Politics, redefined politics as the relationships of power between different groups. She argues that sex is a status category with significant political implications. In a patriarchal society, men dominate women, and this dominance is maintained through cultural values rather than biological differences. Millett's sharp critique of gender roles can be applied to medieval texts, where women often challenge traditional expectations. For example, in medieval virgin martyr legends, Christian maidens boldly confront and outwit their pagan oppressors, ultimately triumphing through their faith and courage. By applying contemporary feminist theories to medieval women's lives and writings, we gain a deeper understanding of their experiences and the ways in which they shaped and were shaped by their society. The rise of courtly love and chivalry in the Middle Ages was a cultural phenomenon that romanticized women, placing them on pedestals as the epitome of beauty and virtue. However, this idealized portrayal did not translate into real improvements in women's legal or economic status. As feminist scholar Kate Millett argues, the chivalric code was a game played by men, elevating women to a pedestal, but not changing the fundamental injustices they faced. Despite the literary praise, women remained subject to the patriarchal structures that governed their lives. Interestingly, Millett also notes that women had more class mobility through marriage than men did. This observation is supported by the lives and writings of medieval women, who often leveraged marriage for social and economic advancement. However, this mobility came with its own constraints, as women were often seen as property to be exchanged in marriage alliances. The focus on women's bodies has been a central theme in feminist theory since ancient times. The negative perceptions of women's bodies, which began with the ancient Greeks, have persisted through the centuries. In the 1970s, Sandra M. Gilbert and Susan Gubar explored the challenges faced by women writers in a patriarchal literary culture. They asked how a woman writer can assert her authority in a world where literary standards are defined by men. Unlike male writers, who do not write primarily for a female audience, women writers have historically had to justify their existence and struggle against the male-dominated literary tradition. The physical and mental health of women has also been a significant concern in feminist discourse. Misogyny, as Susan Bordeaux argues, can make women physically and mentally ill. Bordeaux's work on anorexia nervosa and other bodily disorders highlights how women's bodies are often subjected to strict cultural standards. In the Middle Ages, holy anorexics used self-starvation as a form of resistance, turning cultural expectations of sanctity into a source of power. While this practice was often self-destructive, it allowed these women to gain respect and authority. Material feminism, a theoretical approach that emerged in the 1980s, challenges the idea that women's bodies are inherently oppressive. Instead, it sees the material body as having its own agency and potential for positive change. This perspective can be applied to medieval women, who often found ways to assert their agency within the constraints of their society. For example, medieval women like Hildegard von Bingen and Hrotsveit von Gandersheim used their gardens and writings as spaces of creative expression and resistance. The influence of tribal structures on women's roles is also important to consider. Paula Gunn Allen, a Native American scholar, emphasizes that the roles of women in her culture were not oppressive, but rather characterized by agency and autonomy. Similarly, when examining medieval women, it is crucial to understand their lives within the context of their time. Medieval women, like their modern counterparts, navigated a complex web of freedom and oppression, creativity and tradition, and compliance and subversion. Virginia Woolf's famous essay, A Room of One's Own, suggests that women need both financial independence and a private space to write. Medieval women, such as Christina of Markiate and Hildegard von Bingen, found their own forms of refuge and creative expression, often in confined spaces. These women's experiences resonate with those of later figures like Harriet Jacobs, who hid in her grandmother's attic to escape slavery. Simone de Beauvoir's concept of the prostitute as a shunned yet exalted figure can be seen in medieval saints like Saint Mary of Egypt, whose legend was widely popular. Medieval literature also provides examples of women interacting with each other in ways that challenge the male-dominated narratives of later periods. The Bechdel test, which assesses whether a work depicts two women talking about something other than a man, can be applied to medieval texts to reveal moments of female solidarity and autonomy. Gender, as Judith Butler argues, is performative. The 13th century French romance Silence, in which the protagonist dresses as a man, offers a compelling example of gender as a performance. When Silence is forced to dress as a woman again at the end of the story, it raises questions about the fluidity of gender identity and the performative nature of gender roles. Access to education has been a recurring theme in the struggle for women's rights. Mary Estelle, an early English feminist, proposed the establishment of a female monastery, where women could receive an education and pursue intellectual interests. Similarly, nuns in medieval times often found refuge and intellectual stimulation in nunneries. Mary Wollstonecraft, a prominent feminist of the 18th century, criticized the societal conventions that kept women in ignorance and advocated for their education as a means of achieving virtue and independent reason. The moral judgment of women, as Carol Gilligan argues, is often based on a different ethical framework than that of men. Women's morality of responsibility, which emphasizes communal care and connection, can be seen as a higher form of ethics. Medieval women like Christine de Pizan, who lauded the myth of Demeter and Persephone, recognized the importance of women's contributions to society and the human life cycle. Finally, the feminist historian Joan Kelly-Gadol questions whether women truly experienced a renaissance. While some prominent women in the Renaissance, like Katharina von Bora and Catherine de Medici, exerted significant influence, the overall trend was a restriction of women's autonomy and agency. The transition from the medieval to the early modern period saw women increasingly confined to domestic spaces, a shift that continued into the 16th and 17th centuries. Despite this, women continued to find ways to assert their agency and challenge the limitations imposed on them. We began this book by affirming that a feminist believes that women are humans, and this belief is the foundation of our exploration into the lives and contributions of medieval women. As Toril Moi reminds us through her reading of Simone de Beauvoir, women too embody humanity. This simple yet powerful statement encapsulates the essence of what we have uncovered in the lives of medieval women. They were not just passive figures in history. They were active, intellectual, and deeply influential in their time. Medieval women lived lives that were vital and meaningful. They contributed to the social, political, and cultural fabric of their society. They defended women's moral and spiritual equality, and many fought for women's literacy, a fight that continues to be relevant today as literacy remains a key to emancipation from poverty and oppression. One of the most striking examples of medieval women's resilience and creativity is found in the art of Hildegard of Bingen and the writings of Christine de Pizan. Hildegard, a Benedictine abbess, was a prolific writer, composer, and artist whose works have inspired generations. Christine de Pizan, a French Renaissance writer, defended women's rights and intellectual capabilities in her seminal work, The Book of the City of Ladies. Both women are honored in Judy Chicago's The Dinner Party, an art installation that celebrates the achievements of women throughout history. You can explore this exhibit at the Brooklyn Museum of Art, and even design your own place setting to honor your favorite medieval woman. The stained glass eye, in All Saints' Church in East Barsham, England, is a poignant symbol of the enduring spirit of medieval women. This solitary eye, which survived the violence of the Reformation, gazes at visitors, and we, in turn, recognize in it the spirit of our ancestors. These women, despite the challenges they faced, left a legacy that continues to inspire us today. As we move forward into the 21st century, the lessons we learn from medieval women are more relevant than ever. They show us that the fight for equality and the recognition of women's humanity is a long and ongoing struggle. Adrienne Rich's assertion in her 1970s manifesto, "When We Dead Awaken, Writing as Revision," that the creative energy of patriarchy is fast running out, is a call to action. As women historians and chroniclers of women's lives, we have our work cut out for us. We must continue to uncover, document, and celebrate the achievements of women from the past, and we welcome all those who wish to join us in this endeavor. The challenges we face today are different from those of medieval times, but the spirit of resilience and the pursuit of equality remain the same. By recognizing the contributions of medieval women, we can find the strength and inspiration to continue our own work. We are all part of a continuum of women who have fought for a better, more just world. Let us carry their legacy forward, drawing from their wisdom and courage to shape a future where all women are recognized as full and equal human beings.